Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 11 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-400 Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 11. Question number 447. Scenario. A CI pipeline must identify newly introduced open-source components and report their associated license obligations before a pull request can be merged. Which tool should the team integrate? The available options are as follows. Option A, Jenkins. Option B, Microsoft Visual Source Safe. Option C, Black Duck. Option D, a source code formatting rule. The correct answer is option C, Black Duck. Here's why. Black Duck performs software composition analysis, identifies open-source components, and reports license and vulnerability information during the build process. Why are the other options not correct? A. Jenkins orchestrates CI jobs, but does not independently provide comprehensive open-source component and license analysis. B. Microsoft Visual Source Safe is a legacy source control product. D. Source code formatting rules evaluate coding style rather than dependency licenses. Exam tip. Use an SCA platform to identify third-party components and enforce vulnerability or license policies. Question number 448. Scenario. A build consumes approximately 50 open-source packages. The legal team has published an approved license policy, and every dependency must be evaluated automatically during continuous integration. Which service is designed for this requirement? The available options are as follows. Option A, Helm. Option B, Black Duck. Option C, NuGet. Option D, Maven. The correct answer is option B, Black Duck. Here's why. Black Duck inventories open-source dependencies and evaluates their licenses against organizational compliance policies. Why are the other options not correct? A. Helm packages and deploys applications to Kubernetes. C. NuGet is a package manager and feed protocol rather than a comprehensive license policy scanner. D. Maven builds Java applications and resolves packages, but does not provide the required organization-wide SCA capability by itself. Exam tip. A package manager retrieves dependencies. An SCA tool analyzes dependency risk and license obligations. Question number 449. Scenario. A production Azure web app must trigger a third-party webhook when the highest observed average response time metric exceeds 5 seconds during a 5-minute evaluation window. Complete the Azure Monitor metric alert configuration. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Select the blank as the metric signal. The choices for Statement 1 are requests, average response time, or HTTP server errors. Statement 2. Set the aggregation type to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are total, average, or maximum. Statement 3. Configure the condition as the blank. The choices for Statement 3 are less than 5 seconds, greater than 5 seconds, or equal to 5 seconds. Statement 4. Set the evaluation window to the blank. The choices for Statement 4 are 15 minutes, 1 minute, or 5 minutes. Statement 5. Deliver the notification through the blank. The choices for Statement 5 are an action group with a webhook receiver, an Azure DevOps variable group, or an Azure Boards query. For Statement 1, the correct selection is average response time. This metric represents the application response time measurement. For Statement 2, the correct selection is maximum. Maximum evaluates the peak value observed during the selected window. For Statement 3, the correct selection is greater than 5 seconds. The requirement states that the notification must occur only above 5 seconds. For Statement 4, the correct selection is 5 minutes. The metric must be evaluated over a 5-minute period. For Statement 5, the correct selection is an action group with a webhook receiver. Action groups deliver Azure Monitor alert notifications to webhook endpoints. Exam tip. A metric alert rule defines the signal and threshold, while an action group defines the resulting notification or automation. Question number 450. Scenario. A development team must detect insecure coding patterns as part of continuous integration before the application is deployed or started. Which security testing technique should be added to the CI pipeline? The available options are as follows. Option A, production penetration testing. Option B, threat modeling performed only during architecture planning. Option C, static application security testing. Option D, dynamic application security testing against a running deployment. The correct answer is option C, static application security testing. Here's why. Static analysis examines source code or compiled artifacts without running the application, making it suitable for early execution during continuous integration. Why are the other options not correct? A. Penetration testing normally targets a deployed and running environment. B. Threat modeling is primarily a design stage activity rather than an automated source code scan in each CI run. D. Dynamic analysis requires a running application and is normally performed after a deployable environment is available. Exam tip. Use SESD early in CI and DASD against a running application later in the delivery workflow. Question number 451. Scenario. A Terraform delivery workflow requires one supporting tool for centralized secret management and another for automated infrastructure testing. Match each tool to the requirement it satisfies. Two source items will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, Tiller. Source item 2, Terratest. Source item 3, Vault. Source item 4, Yeoman. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, manage protected credentials used by the infrastructure workflow. Destination B, execute automated tests against Terraform managed infrastructure. The first correct mapping is Vault, map to manage protected credentials used by the infrastructure workflow. The second correct mapping is Terratest, map to execute automated tests against Terraform managed infrastructure. Here's why. Vault centrally stores and controls access to credentials. Terratest provides Go libraries for deploying and validating infrastructure created through tools such as Terraform. Exam tip. Select supporting tools by responsibility. Terraform for provisioning, Vault for secrets, and Terratest for automated infrastructure validation. Question number 452. Scenario. An Azure pipeline uses a GitHub repository and runs whenever changes are pushed to main. If developers push additional commits while a run is active, the pipeline must wait for the active run to finish and then start one new run containing all unbuilt changes. Which trigger settings should be configured? The available options are as follows. Option A, a scheduled trigger. Option B, a branch exclusion. Option C, batch set to true. Option D, a path filter. The correct answer is option C, batch set to true. Here's why. When batch is true, Azure Pipelines waits for the active CI run to finish and then queues one new run containing all changes that have not yet been built. Why are the other options not correct? A scheduled trigger starts runs according to time rather than consolidating changes received during an active CI run. B. A branch exclusion prevents selected branches from triggering runs. D. A path filter determines which changed paths trigger a pipeline, but does not batch multiple pushes. Exam tip. Use trigger.batch when frequent pushes should be consolidated while a previous CI run is still executing. Question number 453. Scenario. An Azure virtual machine scale set automatically scales in and out. Operations personnel must receive an email whenever a scale action occurs. An administrator creates an Azure Monitor action group containing the email recipients, but does not associate it with an alert rule or autoscale notification. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Creating the action group alone satisfies the notification requirement. Statement 1. Creating the action group alone satisfies the notification requirement. The answer is no. No condition or autoscale event has been configured to invoke the action group. Exam tip. Creating an action group does not create an alert. It only defines what happens after a configured condition fires. Question number 454. Scenario. An Azure virtual machine scale set automatically scales in and out. Operations personnel must receive an email whenever a scale action occurs. An administrator configures an Azure DevOps project service hook, but does not configure Azure Monitor. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The Azure DevOps service hook satisfies the scale action notification requirement. Statement 1. The Azure DevOps service hook satisfies the scale action notification requirement. The answer is no. Scale events must be monitored and reported through Azure Monitor or Autoscale notifications. Exam tip. Use Azure DevOps service hooks for DevOps events and Azure Monitor for Azure Resource Telemetry and Platform events. Question number 455. Scenario. An Azure virtual machine scale set automatically scales in and out. Operations personnel must receive an email whenever a scale action occurs. An administrator enables email notifications in the Azure Monitor Autoscale settings. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The Autoscale notification configuration satisfies the requirement. Statement 1. The Autoscale notification configuration satisfies the requirement. The answer is yes. Autoscale notifications can send email when the scale set scales in or out. Exam tip. Use autoscale notifications when the required signal is the execution of an autoscale action. Question number 456. Scenario. An Azure virtual machine scale set automatically scales in and out. Operations personnel must receive an email whenever a scale action occurs. An administrator creates an Azure DevOps project notification subscription for pipeline events. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The Azure DevOps notification subscription satisfies the scale action notification requirement. Statement 1. The Azure DevOps notification subscription satisfies the scale action notification requirement. The answer is no. The notification source is unrelated to Azure Resource Autoscale events. Exam tip. Configure notifications in the system that produces the event being monitored. Question number 457. Scenario. A team is troubleshooting an Azure Pipeline's YAML pipeline. Verbose diagnostic information must be enabled for every run by defining a pipeline variable. Complete the variable definition. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Set the variable name to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are agent, debug, system, debug, pipeline, log, or system, log. Statement 2. Set the variable value to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are detailed, 1, true, or verbose. For Statement 1, the correct selection is system, debug. System, debug is the predefined variable that enables verbose diagnostics. For Statement 2, the correct selection is true. The diagnostic mode is enabled by assigning the Boolean value true. Exam tip. Set system, debug to true when additional pipeline troubleshooting information is required. Question number 458. Scenario. An existing virtual machine uses the legacy VM Insights map experience. The operations team must temporarily retain process and network dependency visualization while preparing its migration to a replacement monitoring solution. Which component collects the process dependency data used by the map? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure Monitor Agent. Option B, Dependency Agent. Option C, Telegraph Agent. Option D, Windows Azure Diagnostics Extension. The correct answer is Option B, Dependency Agent. Here's why. The Dependency Agent collects process and connection information used by the legacy VM Insights map experience. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Monitor Agent collects monitoring data through data collection rules, but does not replace the dependency agent for the legacy map. C. Telegraph collects metrics through input plugins. D. The Windows Azure Diagnostics extension collects Windows diagnostic information, but does not supply service map process dependencies. Exam tip. The VM Insights map experience depends on the dependency agent, although the feature is deprecated for new deployments. Question number 459. Scenario. An Azure Pipelines template defines a string parameter named artifact path. The parameter must be referenced through compile time template expressions. Which two expressions can reference the parameter? Select two. The available options are as follows. Option A, $parameters.artifact path. Option B, $parameters.artifact path. Option C, $parameters, artifact path. Option D, $parameters.artifact path. Option E, $artifact path. The correct answers are option A, $parameters.artifact path, and option C, $parameters, artifact path. Here's why. Azure Pipelines compile time template expressions support both property dereference syntax and bracketed string key syntax. Why are the other options not correct? B. Macro syntax does not reference a template parameter through the parameters object. D. Runtime expression syntax is not the appropriate syntax for template parameter expansion. E. Macro syntax treats artifact path as a variable rather than a template parameter. Exam tip. Reference template parameters with $parameters.name or the equivalent bracket notation. Question number 460. Scenario. You plan to deploy a new database environment using Azure DevOps and automated pipeline tasks. The solution must deploy both schema and structural definitions without data loss. How should you format the export? The available options are as follows. Option A, NDF. Option B, Backpack. Option C, DACPack. Option D, MDF. The correct answer is option C, DACPack. Here's why. A data tier application component package, DACPack, contains the database schema model, tables, views, stored procedures, and is used for schema-only updates and deployments. A backpack includes both schema and data, typically used for database migration or export/import. Why are the other options not correct? A. NDF is a secondary SQL Server database data file, not a deployment package format. B. Backpack includes both schema and table data, which is unnecessary if you are deploying or updating structural schemas alone. D. MDF is the primary SQL Server database data file, not a portable deployment package. Exam tip. Use DACPack for schema-only database deployments and updates. Use Backpack when table data must be included in the export/import package. Question number 461. Scenario. A web application deployed through Azure Pipelines must collect request rates, failed requests, dependency calls, response times, and distributed traces. The telemetry must be available through Azure Monitor. Which service should the DevOps team use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Advisor. Option B, App Service File System Logs. Option C, Application Insights. Option D, Splunk. The correct answer is option C, Application Insights. Here's why. Application Insights provides application performance monitoring, request and dependency telemetry, failures, response times, and distributed tracing through Azure Monitor. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations rather than application-level request tracing. B. App Service Logs provide selected platform and application logs, but not complete application performance monitoring. D. Splunk can analyze telemetry, but Application Insights is the native Azure Monitor capability that directly meets the stated requirements. Exam tip. Use Application Insights for application performance, failures, dependencies, and distributed traces. Question number 462. Scenario. You need to merge the POC branch into the default branch, main/master. The solution must meet the technical requirements of combining all trial commits into a single unified commit on the target branch. Which command should you run? The available options are as follows. Option A, git rebase. Option B, git merge, squash. Option C, git push. Option D, git merge, allow unrelated histories. The correct answer is option B, git merge, squash. Here's why. The git merge, squash command takes all the changes from the specified branch, POC, and squashes them into a single set of changes on the working tree of the default branch, allowing you to commit them as a single clean commit. Why are the other options not correct? A. Git rebase replays commits onto a new base branch, keeping the individual commit history intact rather than collapsing them. C. Git push uploads local commits to a remote repository. It is not a merge strategy command. D. Git merge. Allow unrelated histories merges two projects that share no common history, which is separate from squashing commits. Exam tip. Use git merge, squash when you want to condense multiple experimental or POC commits into a single commit on your target branch. Question number 463. Scenario. An ASP.NET Core Web API is hosted in Azure App Service with Application Insights auto-instrumentation enabled. The developers must instrument the application code to log specific business transactions, such as when a user successfully checks out, and include the total transaction value in the telemetry. What should the development team use to capture this custom telemetry? The available options are as follows. Option A. The Application Insights SDK to send custom events. Option B. The Azure Monitor Agent to capture syslog events. Option C. Azure App Service Diagnostic Settings to route access logs. Option D. The Dependency Agent to track external API calls. The correct answer is option A. The Application Insights SDK to send custom events. Here's why. While auto-instrumentation captures standard requests, dependencies, and exceptions, tracking specific custom business transactions and their associated metadata, like transaction values, requires integrating the Application Insights SDK or a supported OpenTelemetry library and adding custom event tracking code, such as track event. Why are the other options not correct? A. The Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, is designed for OS level and infrastructure logging, not for instrumenting custom business logic within application code. C. Azure App Service Diagnostic Settings route platform logs and web server access logs, but they cannot capture custom application state or specific business events. D. The Dependency Agent maps network connections and processes for virtual machines and scale sets. It does not capture custom business transaction events. Exam tip. Use auto-instrumentation for out-of-the-box request and dependency tracking, but integrate the Application Insights SDK or OpenTelemetry API when you must capture custom business events and metrics. Question number 464. Scenario. An Azure pipeline invokes deployment scripts while diagnostic logging is enabled. The scripts require credentials currently stored as ordinary pipeline variables. The credentials must not be exposed in command lines or log output. How should the credentials be supplied to the scripts? The available options are as follows. Option A. Mark the variables as secret and explicitly map them to task environment variables. Option B. Add secret as a prefix to each variable name. Option C. Pass each credential as a command line argument. Option D. Echo each credential before running the deployment command. The correct answer is option A. Mark the variables as secret and explicitly map them to task environment variables. Here's why. Secret variables are masked by Azure pipelines, and environment variable mapping avoids exposing credentials directly in command line arguments. Why are the other options not correct? B. A naming convention does not mark a variable as secret. C. Command line arguments can be exposed in logs or process inspection. D. Echoing a credential deliberately writes it to standard output. Exam tip. Mark sensitive values as secrets, avoid command line arguments, and never print secrets to logs. Question number 465. Scenario. A developer currently receives email for every discussion associated with teams that the developer joins. The developer wants email only for conversations in which the developer participates or is mentioned. Which two notification settings should be disabled? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Automatically watch teams. Option B. Email delivery for participating. Option C. Email delivery for watching. Option D. Automatically watch repositories. The correct answers are option A, automatically watch teams, and option C, email delivery for watching. Here's why. Disabling automatic team watching prevents broad subscriptions, and disabling email for watched activity removes email generated solely because a conversation is watched. Participating notifications remain enabled for comments and mentions. Why are the other options not correct? B. Disabling participating email would suppress the notifications the developer wants to retain. D. Enabling automatic repository watching would increase broad notifications rather than reduce them. Exam tip. Participating notifications cover conversations in which you comment or are mentioned. Watching covers broader subscribed activity. Question number 466. Scenario. A Java project uses a pom.xml file and is built by Azure pipelines. The organization already operates SonarQube and wants the Java build to publish code quality analysis to that server. Which build task type should be used to compile the project and run the configured analysis? The available options are as follows. Option A, Xcode. Option B, Maven. Option C, CocoaPods. Option D, Gulp. The correct answer is option B, Maven. Here's why. A Maven task can build a pom.xml-based Java project and run the SonarQube analysis configuration associated with the Maven build. Why are the other options not correct? A. Xcode builds Apple platform projects. C. CocoaPods manages Apple platform dependencies. D. Gulp is a JavaScript task runner. Exam tip. Choose the pipeline task that matches the Java project's build system. Maven for pom.xml and Gradle for build.gradle. Question number 467. Scenario. A Java service uses a build.gradle file. Its Azure pipeline must execute the build and submit static analysis results to an existing SonarQube server. Which task type should the pipeline use? The available options are as follows. Option A, Chef. Option B, CocoaPods. Option C, Gradle. Option D, Octopus Deploy. The correct answer is option C, Gradle. Here's why. The Gradle task builds build.gradle-based Java projects and can execute the configured SonarQube analysis. Why are the other options not correct? A. Chef is a configuration management platform. B. CocoaPods manages Apple platform dependencies. D. Octopus Deploy is a deployment automation platform rather than a Java build system. Exam tip. Integrate SonarQube with the build tool already used by the Java project. Question number 468. Scenario. A product group contains 4 autonomous development teams. Product leadership coordinates the shared roadmap through higher-level portfolio items, while each team must plan and complete its own implementation work. Which 2 work item levels should each development team manage autonomously? The available options are as follows. Option A, Initiatives and Epics. Option B, Epics and Features. Option C, Features and Initiatives. Option D, User Stories and Tasks. The correct answer is option D, User Stories and Tasks. Here's why. User stories and tasks represent the implementation work that an autonomous delivery team plans and completes. Higher-level initiatives, epics, and features coordinate broader product outcomes across teams. Why are the other options not correct? A. Initiatives and epics normally represent portfolio-level goals. B. Epics and features commonly span multiple teams or releases. C. Features and initiatives are higher-level planning constructs rather than a team's detailed implementation backlog. Exam tip. Portfolio levels coordinate shared outcomes. Stories and tasks define team-owned delivery work. Question number 469. Scenario. A classic Azure Pipelines release deploys ARM templates to a resource group governed by an assigned Azure policy with an audit effect. After deployment, the release must run an on-demand compliance evaluation and stop further promotion when any newly deployed resource violates the policy. What should be added to the deployment stage? The available options are as follows. Option A, a pre-deployment gate that evaluates the existing resource group. Option B, a post-deployment check Azure policy compliance gate. Option C, a task that redeploys the policy definition with every application release. Option D, a task that creates another policy assignment after each deployment. The correct answer is option B, a post-deployment check Azure Policy Compliance Gate. Here's why. The new resources must exist before an audit policy can evaluate their compliance. A post-deployment policy gate can request an on-demand evaluation and block further promotion when non-compliance is found. Why are the other options not correct? A. A pre-deployment evaluation cannot assess resources that have not yet been deployed. C. The policy definition already exists and does not need to be redeployed with the application. D. The policy is already assigned to the target scope. Exam tip. Use a post-deployment compliance gate when an audit policy must evaluate resources created by the deployment. Question number 470. Scenario. An engineering team uses Azure repos. Pull request creation and update notifications must be delivered to a Microsoft Teams channel with minimal custom development. What should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A. An Azure function that pulls the Azure DevOps REST API. Option B. The Azure Pipelines app for Microsoft Teams. Option C. The Azure Repos app for Microsoft Teams with a repository subscription. Option D. An Azure Automation Runbook that posts messages to Teams. The correct answer is option C, the Azure Repos app for Microsoft Teams with a repository subscription. Here's why. The Azure Repos app provides built-in Teams subscriptions for pull request creation, updates, merges, and other repository events. Why are the other options not correct? A. A custom function introduces unnecessary development and maintenance. B. The Azure Pipelines app monitors pipeline events rather than Azure Repos pull requests. D. A runbook-based REST integration requires custom automation. Exam tip. Use the Azure Repos Teams app for code and pull request events, and the Azure Pipelines app for build and deployment events. Question number 471. Scenario. A GitHub Actions workflow calls a reusable action by using the uses keyword. The workflow author must specify which revision of the action repository should execute. Which three reference types can be placed after the @ symbol? Select 3. The available options are as follows. Option A. A commit SHA. Option B. A git tag. Option C. A runner label. Option D. A branch name. Option E. An action serial number. The correct answers are Option A, a commit SHA, Option B, a git tag, and Option D, a branch name. Here's why. The ref after @ in an action reference can identify a commit SHA, tag, or branch in the action repository. Why are the other options not correct? C. A runner label selects workflow execution infrastructure and does not identify an action revision. E. GitHub Actions does not use action serial numbers as repository refs. Exam tip. Pin third-party actions to a full commit SHA when immutable and auditable action code is required. Question number 472. Scenario. A monitoring platform ingests application, pipeline, agent, and infrastructure logs. Engineers must correlate the records and determine the probable root cause of failed deployments. Which advanced monitoring capability is required? The available options are as follows. Option A. Synthetic availability testing. Option B. Alert routing. Option C. Log analytics. Option D. Directed monitoring. The correct answer is Option C. Log analytics. Here's why. Analytics provides parsing, querying, correlation, and aggregation across logs from multiple systems, enabling engineers to investigate contributing events and identify root causes. Why are the other options not correct? A. Synthetic monitoring tests availability and user journeys, but does not provide broad log correlation. B. Alert routing distributes notifications after conditions are detected. D. Directed monitoring is not the required cross-source log analysis capability. Exam tip. Use analytics and correlation when troubleshooting requires evidence from multiple telemetry sources. Question number 473. Scenario. A React application is built in a single Azure Pipelines job. Downloading unchanged NPM packages adds several minutes to every run. A developer proposes publishing the node_modules directory as a pipeline artifact to optimize dependency restoration in later pipeline runs. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Publishing the dependencies as a pipeline artifact is the appropriate built-in mechanism for caching unchanged NPM packages between runs. Statement 1. Publishing the dependencies as a pipeline artifact is the appropriate built-in mechanism for caching unchanged NPM packages between runs. The answer is no. The cache task should restore and save NPM dependency data based on a cache key. Exam tip. Use pipeline caching for reusable dependencies and pipeline artifacts for outputs that must be consumed or retained. Question number 474. Scenario. A legacy on-premises automation application must authenticate non-interactively to Microsoft Entra ID by using an application registration and a client secret. Which three values are required to request an access token? The available options are as follows. Option A, application ID, client secret, and tenant ID. Option B, object ID, client secret, and subscription ID. Option C, application ID, object ID, and subscription ID. Option D, tenant ID, object ID, and resource group ID. The correct answer is option A, application ID, client secret, and tenant ID. Here's why. The tenant ID identifies the Microsoft Entra tenant, the application ID identifies the client application, and the client secret authenticates that client. Why are the other options not correct? B, the object ID is a directory object identifier and does not replace the client application ID. C, a subscription ID identifies an Azure subscription but is not required to authenticate the client to Microsoft Entra ID. D, a resource group ID is an authorization scope, not a client credential. Exam tip. Client secret authentication uses tenant ID, client ID, and client secret. Azure subscription scope is applied after authentication. Question number 475. Scenario. A platform engineer is authoring a PowerShell desired state configuration definition. The definition will contain node-specific resource declarations. What is the correct nesting order for the code blocks? The available options are as follows. Option A, resource, configuration, node. Option B, configuration, node, resource. Option C, node, resource, configuration. Option D, configuration, resource, node. The correct answer is option B, configuration, node, resource. Here's why. A DSC definition begins with a configuration block. Node blocks are declared inside it, and each node block contains the resource declarations that describe the desired state. Why are the other options not correct? A, a resource cannot contain the configuration and node declarations. C, node is nested inside configuration, not outside it. D, resources must be associated with a node block. Exam tip. The standard PowerShell DSC hierarchy is configuration, then node, then resource. Question number 476. Scenario. A development team must receive Microsoft Teams channel notifications when Azure Pipelines builds or release deployments fail. The solution must require no custom application code. What should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, the Azure Boards app for Teams. Option B, an Azure function that pulls pipeline runs. Option C, the Azure Pipelines app for Teams with pipeline subscriptions. Option D, an Azure automation runbook that calls the REST API. The correct answer is option C, the Azure Pipelines app for Teams with pipeline subscriptions. Here's why. The Azure Pipelines app can subscribe a Teams channel to completed builds, release deployments, approvals, and related pipeline events without custom code. Why are the other options not correct? A, the Azure Boards app reports work item activity. B, a custom function requires development and ongoing maintenance. D, a runbook-based integration is unnecessary when a supported Teams app exists. Exam tip. Use the Azure Pipelines app for native build, release, deployment, and approval notifications in Teams. Question number 477. Scenario. A PowerShell DSC definition must install the IIS web server role on a Windows Server virtual machine. Match each DSC keyword to its required location in the definition. 3 source items will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. File. Source item 2. Windows feature. Source item 3. Depends on. Source item 4. Configuration. Source item 5. Include all subfeature. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Keyword that declares the outer DSC definition. Destination B. Resource type that installs the web server role. The first correct mapping is configuration, mapped to keyword that declares the outer DSC definition. The second correct mapping is Windows feature, mapped to resource type that installs the web server role. Here's why. Configuration declares the DSC configuration, while Windows feature manages Windows server roles and features, such as web server. Exam tip. Use purpose-built DSC resources such as Windows feature instead of a generic script resource when possible. Question number 478. Scenario. A PowerShell DSC definition uses the Windows feature set resource to ensure that the IIS web server and SMTP server features are installed. Complete the resource declaration. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Set the name property to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are at Mail Server, IIS, at SMTP Server, Web Server, at Mail Server, Web Server, or at SMTP Server, IIS. Statement 2. Set the desired state property to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Install equals Present, Ensure equals Present, Enforce equals Present, or Required equals Present. For Statement 1, the correct selection is at SMTP Server, Web Server. Windows feature set accepts the feature names as an array. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Ensure equals Present. The Ensure property specifies whether the listed features must be present or absent. Exam tip. Use the Windows feature identifiers and set Ensure to present when the features must be installed. Question number 479. Scenario. A program manager uses the Azure Board's Dependency Tracker Risk Graph to evaluate relationships between producer and consumer teams. Match each visual property to the information it communicates. 2 source items will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Link length. Source item 2. Node color. Source item 3. Link width. Source item 4. Link color. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Number of dependencies between teams. Destination B. Risk state of the dependencies. The first correct mapping is link width, mapped to number of dependencies between teams. The second correct mapping is link color, mapped to risk state of the dependencies. Here's why. Thicker graph links indicate a larger number of dependencies, while risk state color coding distinguishes at-risk, neutral, and on-track relationships. Exam tip. In the dependency tracker risk graph, line thickness communicates volume and color communicates risk state. Question number 480. Scenario. A log analytics workspace must use an RSA key stored in Azure Key Vault to protect newly ingested log data. A system-assigned managed identity will be used by an Azure Monitor Logs dedicated cluster. Arrange the required actions in the correct order. 1 item will not be used. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Link the log analytics workspace to the dedicated cluster. Item 2. Grant the cluster identity certificate management permissions in Key Vault. Item 3. Create an Azure Key Vault and generate or import the encryption key. Item 4. Update the dedicated cluster with the Key Vault key identifier. Item 5. Create the dedicated cluster with a system-assigned managed identity. Item 6. Grant the cluster identity the required Key Vault cryptographic permissions. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create an Azure Key Vault and generate or import the encryption key. Second, create the dedicated cluster with a system-assigned managed identity. Third, grant the cluster identity the required key vault cryptographic permissions. Fourth, update the dedicated cluster with the key vault key identifier. Fifth, link the log analytics workspace to the dedicated cluster. Here's why. The encryption key and cluster identity must exist before permissions can be granted. The cluster can then be configured with the key identifier, after which linked workspaces use the cluster for customer-managed key encryption of new data. Exam tip. The dedicated cluster identity accesses the key vault key. Workspaces receive customer-managed key protection by linking to that cluster. Question number 481. Scenario. A recoverable Azure Key Vault already contains an encryption key. A log analytics workspace must encrypt new data by using that key through an Azure Monitor Logs dedicated cluster. Arrange the 4 configuration actions in the correct order. One item will not be used. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Register an unrelated Azure resource provider. Item 2. Link the workspace to the dedicated cluster. Item 3. Grant the cluster identity the required cryptographic access to the key. Item 4. Create the dedicated cluster with a managed identity. Item 5. Configure the dedicated cluster with the key vault key identifier. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create the dedicated cluster with a managed identity. Second, grant the cluster identity the required cryptographic access to the key. Third, configure the dedicated cluster with the key vault key identifier. Fourth, link the workspace to the dedicated cluster. Here's why. The cluster identity is required before key vault access can be assigned. The cluster must be configured with the authorized key before a workspace is linked for customer-managed key encryption. Exam tip. Configure the dedicated cluster and its key vault access before linking log analytics workspaces. Question number 482. Scenario. A new Azure DevOps project has 3 teams. Release managers must only read repositories. Developers must contribute code and create branches, but must not bypass branch policies. Repository leads must create repositories and administer project permissions and repository policies. The principle of least privilege must be followed. Match each team to the appropriate built-in Azure DevOps group. The left side items are as follows. Left item 1. Repository leads release managers developers. The right side choices are as follows. Right option A. Project collection administrators. Right option B. Readers. Right option C. Contributors. Right option D. Build administrators. Right option E. Project administrators. Right option F. Project collection valid users. The correct matches are as follows. Left item 1. Repository leads the correct match is project administrators. Left item 2. Release managers the correct match is readers. Left item 3. Developers the correct match is contributors. Here's why. Project administrators can administer project repositories, policies, and permissions. Readers receive view-only access, while contributors can create branches and contribute code without receiving administrative policy bypass privileges by default. Exam tip. Use built-in groups according to responsibility and avoid project collection permissions when project-level permissions are sufficient. Question number 483. Scenario. An Azure pipeline deploys an ARM template containing an Azure Data Factory resource to an existing resource group. The deployment must update or replace the Data Factory definition when necessary, but resources omitted from the template must remain unchanged. Complete the Azure Resource Manager template deployment at 3-task configuration. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Set action to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Start, Create or Update Resource Group, or Select Resource Group. Statement 2. Set deployment mode to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Complete, Validation, or Incremental. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Create or Update Resource Group. This action deploys or updates the ARM resources at Resource Group scope. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Incremental. Incremental mode does not delete resources omitted from the template. Exam tip. Use incremental deployment to preserve unrelated resources. Complete mode removes resources absent from the template. Question number 484. Scenario. A Windows Server node receives a DSC configuration with these characteristics. A Windows feature resource ensures that web server is present. A file resource copies index.html from c:/source to c:/initpub/www root. The file resource depends on the Windows feature resource. The local configuration manager uses apply and monitor. The consistency check frequency is 60 minutes. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. DSC installs the web server feature before applying the file resource. Statement 2. Apply and monitor automatically restores the desired state after an administrator removes the web server feature. Statement 3. The local configuration manager can report the removed feature as configuration drift during a consistency check. Statement 1. DSC installs the web server feature before applying the file resource. The answer is yes. The file resource explicitly depends on the Windows feature resource. Statement 2. Apply and monitor automatically restores the desired state after an administrator removes the web server feature. The answer is no. Apply and monitor reports drift, but does not remediate it automatically. Statement 3. The local configuration manager can report the removed feature as configuration drift during a consistency check. The answer is yes. The 60-minute consistency cycle reevaluates the assigned configuration and records discrepancies. Exam tip. Apply and monitor reports drift. Apply and autocorrect reports and remediates drift. Question number 485. Scenario. An application insights logs query reads the performance counters table. The query must compare average processor usage for each Cloud Roll instance by day during the previous 7 days. Match each KQL expression to the location where it should be added. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Bin, timestamp, 1H. Source item 2. Render time chart. Source item 3. Project time chart. Source item 4. Bin, timestamp, 1D. Source item 5. Render chart. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Second grouping expression and summarize average, value, by cloud_roll instance. Destination B. Final operator that displays the results. The first correct mapping is bin, timestamp, 1D, mapped to second grouping expression and summarize average, value, by cloud_roll instance. The second correct mapping is render time chart, mapped to final operator that displays the results. Here's why. Daily binning aggregates processor values into the required day-level intervals. Render time chart visualizes the resulting time series separately for the role instances. Exam tip. Use bin with summarize to create time intervals and render time chart to visualize time series results. Question number 486. Scenario. A log analytics table named app events contains application events with time generated, name, and user ID columns. A query must include only events whose name starts with open new support case. Count events per user and calendar day. Exclude user day results with fewer than 3 events. Return the 10 highest counts in descending order. Arrange all the KQL statements in the correct order. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Where daily events equals 3. Item 2. App events. Item 3. Top 10 by daily events desk. Item 4. Summarize daily events equals count by bin, time generated, 1D, user ID. Item 5. Where name starts with open new support case. The correct sequence is as follows. First, app events. Second, where name starts with open new support case. Third, summarize daily events equals count by bin, time generated, 1D, user ID. Fourth, where daily events equals 3. Fifth, top 10 by daily events desk. Here's why. Filtering before aggregation limits the counted rows. Summarize creates each user day count. The subsequent where removes low counts, and top sorts descending while limiting the output. Exam tip. In KQL, filter raw events before summarize, filter aggregate values afterward, and use top for sorting with a result limit. Question number 487. Scenario. A Java service is stored in Azure repos. Its pipeline must download packages from a dependency server accessible only from the corporate network and publish the compiled output as an Azure DevOps artifact. A proposed design uses a Microsoft-hosted Windows agent and installs the required Java version during the job. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The proposed design satisfies all the pipeline requirements. Statement 1. The proposed design satisfies all the pipeline requirements. The answer is no. Private dependency access requires suitable private connectivity, typically through a self-hosted agent, and artifact publication must be configured separately. Exam tip. Agent connectivity, build tool installation, and artifact publication are separate pipeline requirements. Question number 488. Scenario. A team deploys an Azure App Service web application through Azure pipelines. The application must send request, dependency, failure, and performance telemetry to a workspace-based application insights resource without requiring a separately managed monitoring agent. Which configuration should the team implement? The available options are as follows. Option A. Enable application insights integration for the web app and associate it with the application insights resource. Option B. Enable only app service file system logging. Option C. Create an Azure Monitor metric alert without instrumenting the application. Option D. Install Azure Monitor Agent in the App Service Sandbox. The correct answer is Option A. Enable application insights integration for the web app and associate it with the application insights resource. Here's why. The App Service Application Insights integration instruments the application and sends application telemetry to the selected workspace-based application insights resource. Why are the other options not correct? B. File system logging does not provide complete application performance and dependency telemetry. C. An alert consumes telemetry but does not instrument the application. D. Azure Monitor Agent is not installed inside the App Service Sandbox for this purpose. Exam tip. Application Insights instrumentation produces application telemetry. Alerts and dashboards only consume telemetry after it is collected. Question number 489. Scenario. A GitHub repository contains process documentation maintained as Word files and flowcharts maintained as bitmap images. The team must store the documentation as text, minimize separate files, and make both the written content and diagrams easy to review, merge, and reuse through Git. Select the preferred format for each content type. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Convert the written process documentation to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Portable Document Format, Markdown, or Microsoft Word. Statement 2. Convert the flowcharts to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Mermaid Diagrams, Portable Network Graphics, or Bitmap Images. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Markdown. Markdown is lightweight plain text that Git can diff and merge effectively. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Mermaid Diagrams. Mermaid represents diagrams as editable text instead of opaque image files. Exam tip. Documentation as code works best when both prose and diagrams are stored in text-based formats. Question number 490. Scenario. A team uses Azure App Service to host a mission-critical web application. A new version of the application has been deployed to a staging deployment slot. The release pipeline must direct exactly 15% of live user traffic to the staging slot to monitor telemetry and error rates before completing a full release. Which app service feature should the team configure in the pipeline? The available options are as follows. Option A, traffic routing. Option B, health check. Option C, access restrictions. Option D, a deployment slot swap with preview. The correct answer is Option A, traffic routing. Here's why. App Service traffic routing allows you to specify a percentage of incoming traffic to route to a specific deployment slot, such as a staging slot. This is the native method for achieving a canary release or progressive exposure in App Service. Why are the other options not correct? B. Health checks evaluate the availability of instances, but do not route a fixed percentage of traffic to a staging slot. C. Access restrictions filter traffic by IP or virtual network, not by random percentage routing. D. A slot swap with preview validates the target slot settings, but routes 100% of traffic to the production slot once completed. It does not split traffic 85/15. Exam tip. Use app service traffic routing for canary deployments, percentage-based rollouts, and slot swaps for zero downtime blue-green deployments. Question number 491. Scenario. A CI pipeline builds a reusable .NET library and publishes it as a NuGet package to an Azure Artifacts feed. The team must ensure that dependent applications consume only package versions that have successfully passed all automated integration tests. Unvalidated package versions must remain in the feed but be hidden from external consumers. What should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A. Promote the tested package version to a feed view and instruct consumers to connect to that view. Option B. Delete the unvalidated package version and republish it to a new feed. Option C. Change the package versioning scheme from semantic versioning to calendar versioning. Option D. Configure an upstream source to filter unvalidated versions. The correct answer is Option A. Promote the tested package version to a feed view and instruct consumers to connect to that view. Here's why. Azure Artifacts feed views, such as at release or at pre-release, allow you to share package versions that have met specific quality criteria. Consumers connecting to the view will only see the promoted versions, effectively hiding unvalidated packages. Why are the other options not correct? B. Package versions in Azure Artifacts are immutable. Deleting and republishing disrupts immutability and continuous delivery best practices. C. Semantic versioning versus calendar versioning dictates naming conventions, not access control or promotion. D. Upstream sources retrieve packages from external feeds. They do not filter internal package promotion states. Exam tip. Package versions are immutable. Use feed views, like at release, to promote and expose validated package versions to consumers. Question number 492. Scenario. An automation service running on an Azure virtual machine must read secrets from Azure Key Vault. Long-lived credentials must not be stored on the virtual machine. Which configuration should be implemented? The available options are as follows. Option A. Enable a system-assigned managed identity on the virtual machine and grant it the Key Vault secrets user role. Option B. Store a service principal secret in a file on the virtual machine. Option C. Assign the virtual machine identity the owner role at subscription scope. Option D. Generate a storage account shared access signature for the virtual machine. The correct answer is Option A. Enable a system-assigned managed identity on the virtual machine and grant it the Key Vault secrets user role. Here's why. The managed identity obtains Microsoft Intra tokens without a stored credential. Key Vault secrets user grants the data plane permission required to read secret values. Why are the other options not correct? B. A stored client secret creates a long-lived credential management burden. C. Owner at subscription scope violates least privilege. D. A storage SAS does not authenticate the virtual machine to Key Vault. Exam tip. Use managed identity for authentication and a narrowly scoped Key Vault data role for authorization. Question number 493. Scenario. An Azure App Service application must retrieve secrets from Azure Key Vault without storing a client secret. Access must follow least privilege principles. Which two actions should you perform? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Enable the web app's system-assigned managed identity. Option B. Grant the web app identity the Key Vault secrets user role at the required Key Vault scope. Option C. Assign the web app identity the contributor role at subscription scope. Option D. Store a personal access token in an application setting. Option E. Enable anonymous access to the Key Vault. The correct answers are Option A. Enable the web app's system-assigned managed identity, and Option B. Grant the web app identity the Key Vault secrets user role at the required Key Vault scope. Here's why. The system-assigned identity removes the need for a stored client credential. Key Vault Secrets user permits the identity to read secret values without granting unrelated management permissions. Why are the other options not correct? C. Subscription contributor is excessively broad and does not provide the appropriate Key Vault data access by itself. D. A personal access token is unrelated to Key Vault authentication. E. Key Vault must not be exposed anonymously. Exam tip. Authentication identifies the workload. The Key Vault data plane role determines which secret operations it can perform. You have completed part 11 of the AZ-400 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.